and thank you for joining me. I am with Matt Loeb. He's the Chief Executive Officer of ISACA, and we happen to be at the ISACA Oceania Conference in Canberra. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, sir.
Now, you're the CEO of ISACA. Can you please briefly tell us about ISACA's mission and a little bit about your role?
Sure. ISACA is a nonprofit professional community of 160,000 members and certified professionals around the globe. In fact, in 191 countries, to be exact. And ISACA's purpose is to help you realize the positive potential of technology. And our promise is to inspire confidence that enables innovation through technology. That's really code for the fact that technology is generally for good. But at the same time, if we want to realize the positive effects of technology, we also need to manage the risks that the nefarious activity that can come from the technology itself.
I always like to think that Scifi is a warning to us about what the future might be like if we don't, take heed and put in the kill switch or, put in the correct processes.
That's actually, the Scifi has helped us through time being somewhat accurate as to how the technology may come into play.
Well, they talk about how science fiction turns into science fact on a practically daily basis these days.
Well, actually, there was an interesting video that Apple Computer put out about 20 years ago.
I think I've seen it with the Navigator.
The Knowledge Navigator.
Yeah, that's it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the Knowledge Navigator, if you actually watch it today, about 95% of it is real.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to see how things that are predicted for the future can actually come to pass.
And there's that famous saying that the future is already here, just hasn't been widely distributed yet. That was a great example of 20 years ago. The future was there, and 20 years later, we all have it in our pocket.
Well, the interesting thing that comes to mind on that is that if we look at all of the media today talking about the concept of digital disruption
and digital transformation,
and digital transformation, digital disruption, disruptive innovation, this is not new stuff. In 1970, Alvin Toffler wrote a book called Future Shock, which talked about the fact that we were in a revolution that technology was driving. In 1997, 20 years ago, Clayton Christensen wrote about disruptive innovation. All of these things are still the same today. I mean, it's been part of our landscape for a while. The thing that really creates the pain now is just the pace of change. And that the technology landscape is changing so rapidly, and then it becomes exacerbated by the increasing complexity of the legal, regulatory, and compliance environment.
And we have the whole Luddite thing where people are worried that technology will take away their jobs, and yet I was just writing about a Capgemini report talking about how businesses are implementing AI, and AI will help create new jobs of the future.
The notion of AI replacing jobs, I don't want to ever say that it's far-fetched, but we could certainly look at it that if that ever came to pass, it would create some social issues in our world that would be very difficult to deal with. I think right now it's about trying to figure out how humans and machines work together. So there was a study recently done that said that if you actually look at some core implementations of AI in the legal profession, you could actually save an attorney 2 hours per week from basic administrative stuff that they have to do, which would then allow them to have more time to focus on the case that they're trying to win or the research that they're trying to do. So I think it's going to be more a matter of how we assimilate this new capability, which is actually not all that new either. It's just coming to a point now where it's matured and it can be commercialized. But how we
still primitive maturity too.
What we do. So.
And the AP, I think, has been using some sort of a computer program or sort of robot to write sports reports. So you don't have to have journalists doing that. They can spend their time on more investigative sort of journalism. So it's happening across all industries.
Permeates everything, and that's that actually ties to an important theme that I want to cover in my talk tomorrow, which is that if we look at this from managing the significant investments that we're making in technology, based on the fact that technology is embedded in almost everything we do, it requires enterprises to effectively manage that technology investment to ensure that it is effective and efficient and that they get the return on investments that they're making. So this comes under the concept of sound governance of enterprise information and technology. So when we look at the cyber issue about how can we be as resilient as we should be, it doesn't matter how resilient you think you want to be. You won't be able to be effective in your cybersecurity defense if you don't have good discipline around the governance of your information and technology. Perhaps more simply stated is that if I'm a business, I need to know, I generate lots of information, but I need to know which information is the real gold stuff, because that's the stuff I really need to protect. And I need to look at how that is managed, and that I have the appropriate disciplines and processes in place. Because if I have that sound foundation, then making decisions on how to protect that information, whether it be through tools or, more importantly, people making decisions, I'm more capable of doing it because it's all organized and I understand what's happening in the complexity of my network architecture.
I mean, I think the simple, really absurdly simple way of putting it is it's no point having the world's best locks and thumbprint scanners and all the rest if you've got the key or the code underneath the mat in the front door. You've got to have that discipline around.
The thing we all know is that it would be great to be able to sit here and say that we can give you the recipe on how you will never ever be breached. But that's not realistic, and that's why we do talk about resilience. And again, in the spirit of my talk tomorrow, I will be emphasizing the fact that it starts with a sound foundation in the governance of enterprise information and technology. And actually, the principles around information security, we've been worrying about that for 40 to 50 years now. So there's a lot of concepts that are, again, taking shape and grabbing mind share because of things that we're reading in the news. 143 million people were affected at Equifax. Yeah. I was one of them. And it was really, really interesting how when I went in to find out if I was affected, because I am an Equifax customer, what did they do to try to determine whether I was one of them? They asked me to enter in my social security number. Yeah. It's a kind of, I've given you that, by the way, and now you want it again. So I really have real confidence in what you're doing here. Yeah. And it's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek there, because actually as a company, I think they're trying to do their best to make sure that they maintain resilience. And that is, will tie to the other part of my talk, which is how does an enterprise actually understand where it is in its continuum of being resilient?
I mean, plenty of companies will say we can sell you any number of audit tools, and there's plenty of ways out there that you can sort of determine where you are.
Audit tools, maturity models, up the wazoo. And it's not that all of those things are not relevant in their own right. But what's missing right now is a universal consensus model that everyone can sign on to and use. The story starts with a large financial payment institution where the CISO was telling me that he was called into the boardroom and the directors drilled him on asking, are we safe? And his response was, I think so. And of course an astute director says, well, what do you mean you think so? And his answer was, well, I think we're doing all the right things. I have conversations with my colleagues and I get anecdotal information that would suggest that we're doing the right things. Yet, I don't know whether the information I'm getting is valid, and there's actually no formal way for me to assess myself in the context of our peer organizations or organizations of similar size, etc. So earlier this year, ISACA and our subsidiary, the Capability Maturity Model Institute, CMMI, we embarked on building a solution for this, and we plan to roll that out in March. It's a risk-based assessment tool, leveraging the CMMI, which many organizations have embraced for software, for the improvement of software quality. And again, it's a risk-based model that incorporates not just one framework, but the many frameworks that are out there around cybersecurity. So the NIST cybersecurity framework, of course, ISO 27001, ASD 8 here in Australia, and the CMM threat kill chain. We've looked across all of those because there's generally overlap on them. And what we've done is pulled out the highlights and created a way in which an organization can actually perform a self-assessment. When they perform the self-assessment, it will yield results as to at what level of capability maturity are they in their continuum. The gold standard from that, though, will be the fact that when I get those results, I'll be able to see, well, how do peer companies compare? I'll get to benchmark that. And I can benchmark it against companies that are in my industry or perhaps of similar size. So that gives me some validation of where I am on the continuum. And then the other report that comes out of it is what's the roadmap to improve resilience. So if I am the way the capability model works is your self-assessment will yield a ranking between 1 and 5. So if you're 3, how do you get to 4, or how do you get to 5? A roadmap will be produced that tells you where you need to put your focus on, and then that becomes a business decision, which is what's the level of investment that we're willing to make to move us up on the resilience scale.
And to avoid having to make mandatory disclosures.
And that will depend. That really depends on, does the organization have a grip on its business, right? So if you're a little retail shop and you're not doing e-commerce, you might be a hardware store or something, you might have an online presence, level 3 might be good enough. But if you're a hospital, level 5 might be where you want to be, because if you don't achieve that maximum level of resilience and you are attacked,
people can die.
People could die. That's exactly the point. So we don't want to. We're not looking at. We're not going to dictate that. I mean, I think that's where businesses and industries come together to determine that. And I think when we look across the cybersecurity spectrum, we read about the economic issues of taking money or stealing IDs, but the things that keep me awake at night is I'm worried about critical infrastructure. What happens to electric utilities, water, those critical things that really preserve our society and keep our societies rolling and protect human life.
Absolutely. So it's nearly the end of day one. Are there any issues that really resonated with you today that you've been hearing from other speakers?
I think one thing, being here in Australia and having the privilege of traveling throughout the world to see what's happening in other places, one message would be that I am inspired by Australia's approach to dealing with the challenges of cybersecurity. The notion of having a holistic view and coordinating it across the entire country, public-private partnerships, looking at the academic side in terms of building skills development, looking at alternatives to get, for instance, looking at the potential of getting more women into the space, or leveraging some of the 5,000 veterans that come out of the armed services every year. I really like the fact that there seems to be a really holistic view to how to approach this. And I think that's relevant in the fact that cybersecurity is everybody's business. So government plays a role, industry plays a role, nonprofit organizations play a role, and people play a role. And we all have to be working together for the collective impact of getting to the level of resilience and protection that we believe we deserve.
So if we look forward into the future, 10 years, do you think the state of cybersecurity will be, so much more positive because of all of this work that's being done, or do you think maybe we'll have become complacent and sort of still be stuck, where we are?
I don't think it'll be complacency. I actually think that we will see continued progress. Now, if I was completely idealistic, I would love to say that we'll much better have our arms around security, and that the panic of the mind share, similar to, for those of us that are old enough to remember Y2K.
Or the oil shock of the 70s, which was a different sort of
That-
shock, future shock of its
shock,
of its
yeah,
time.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, so you would think some of the pandemonium will have calmed down.
Mm.
The variable there is
The ingenuity of the bad guys.
Well, that's one variable.
Yeah.
The bad guys continue to be smart and they're well resourced. I believe though that we're going to get better in that regard. I think the real key is security by design. So right now we talk about the need for people to come on to protect the systems, and a lot of that is because we're looking to defend legacy systems that were not designed with security in them. And we need to do that for the immediate need. The challenge will be at what level of investment will we be willing to make in order to replace some of those legacy systems in exchange for systems and devices, right? Because we're going to have tens of billions, hundreds of billions of devices connected to the internet
of
to
Things,
have the assurance that the security is built in by design. And that becomes particularly challenging when we go back to critical infrastructure, because if I'm an electric utility, replacing industrial control systems, I mean, it can take a year just to build it, and then the cost of implementation is exceedingly high. And if you're an electric utility, you get your money through the regulators, so there's a lot of dynamics that are involved in that from an economic standpoint, even though I would contend that a lot of the solutions could be made available today.
It's like you said before, it's like Y2K. I mean, that involved a lot of software infrastructure, but now we're talking about physical infrastructure, and as you say, with many of these things not being built with security in mind, even today in 2017, I mean, it's mind-boggling that it's a big issue that we have to grapple with and solve.
It's reflective of trying to realize the positive potential of technology, which is where I started the talk. And it's not just about hardware, it is about software. Secure software design is equally as important as making sure that devices are designed. And I think this will be evolutionary, but we can also live by the memory that, again, this stuff is really not new. If you watched The Imitation Game and Alan Turing cracking the code of the Enigma computer during World War II, right? So security has been an issue for many, many, many years, and it's going to continue. I think the question is, can we develop a confidence that will inspire us to have the trust in the systems that we're using, so we worry less about it and focus more on the positive aspects that technology can deliver.
Now, as we get towards the end of the interview, I always like to just change gears a little bit and ask if you could please share some of the best advice you received to help you get where you are today.
I really like that question because I know everybody will answer it differently, but there are really two pieces of advice that have helped shape me, which the first is staying positive. Always look for the silver lining, even when you're in the most adverse of situations. There's usually a good lesson involved, and to that end, related to that is always look for the goodness in people. Even people who may come off to you as contentious or argumentative, try to cut through that and try to understand what their voices are saying. I think it really helps when we hear all voices and give considerations to everything that an individual wants to contribute. And when we process all of that, even if it involves some debate, we end up with really good collective intelligence and results. And it's really that type of collaborative, interactive, and staying positive approach that can really make a difference in the world.
It can bring a consensus.
Sorry?
It can bring the consensus together and allow you to move forward.
Absolutely. We never get any better if we don't debate, right? I mean, if we have a bunch of people just saying yes, yes, men and women, nothing ever changes. So the beauty is that if we can figure out the ways as people to collaborate with one another and with organizations to actually embrace some of the technology concepts. I talk about ISACA being a network of enterprises. ISACA by itself cannot do everything we want to do. We need to partner with other organizations, other industries, other people to do what we do in order to achieve the collective impact that we really want to see happen in the world.
So do you have any final messages, not just for iTWire viewers and readers, but for your current and future ISACA members?
I think the most important thing is that the pace of change is creating the pain. And so take a deep breath, because that's probably not going to change.
Yeah.
What I would tell you, though, is you really need to commit to looking at what's next now. Incorporate into your work trying to understand what the next thing that's going to come down, that's going to be on your doorstep, that you're going to have to figure out, whether it's to integrate into your enterprise architecture, or whether it's to help your organization assess the risks of those new technologies. Trying to stay a step ahead is really the key in this game, and we know it's not easy, and I know that ISACA will continue to be there to help you, and we'll be looking at how to collaborate with other organizations to make the learnings easier for you.
Sounds like if you think about tomorrow, yesterday, you'll have a better today.
So, yes, exactly. Every day is a good day,
That's
right?
it, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time. I wish you great success for the rest of the conference, and I hope to talk to you again in the future.
Alex, it was a privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you.